Okay. Now again, I have posted several links in week 1 that lead you to the pre-recorded materials, including these. What I'm saying is this presentation has been recorded. All right, so you can have a look at the pre-recorded materials. Okay, so in this tutorial, what I'm trying to do is just to highlight the key concepts, okay, and that we are going to discuss. All right. All right. Week 3 is basic. Module 2 actually contains 2 parts. The first one is market research, and the second one is consumer behavior. All right. Now let's have a look at these 2 topics tonight. All right. We recall that in terms of marketing process, in module 1, we talk about a number of things. Okay, there are 4 steps that we discussed in marketing process. The first one is understand. The second one is to create, communicate, and deliver. All right. Now, part of understand in marketing process, we actually try to get some insights. We try to understand the customers, we understand the competitors, resellers or marketing intermediaries, and some other relevant issues such as government regulations or the other macro environmental forces. Okay, so that's basically the information that we need, right? Because it is related to the process that we need to go through in marketing. Okay. Now, in terms of information itself, it doesn't mean that we need to have lots of information. What we need is to have a good information, right? A good size of information. Okay, so in saying that, actually today's marketing landscape is just the opposite of, let's say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Okay, in those years, we actually marketers struggled to get the information, so that we need to budget some research activities to collect the information. And in today's business landscape, we have lots of information driven by digital technology, digital marketing, digital media that we use. Okay. All right. So let's have a look at it. Okay. This is what we mean by marketing information system. Again, I'm not going to discuss these things. You can go through it yourself. Okay. It contains people and so on and so forth. Okay. Oh, someone was just knocking probably. Anyway, so that's what we mean by marketing information system. Okay, so it is basically about the procedure, people, equipment to collect and distribute the information. All right. All right. So how do we use marketing information? We can use marketing information to identify potential existing customers. So that helps us to reveal who are our current or existing customers or the potential customers. Okay, highlight opportunities and threats. Okay, these two basically, the first two basically helps us to design marketing mix. Okay, the marketing mix variables or the set of offering that we promise for the customers, and changes as well. We can also research that, and that includes the competitor changes. Okay, all right. There are 3 things in terms of sources. There are 3 sources of information that we need to look at. The first one is internal records, marketing intelligence, and market research. Okay. Now, the internal record is basically the first thing I'd like to recommend you guys to look at when it comes to sources of information, right? So you research that internal records, okay? They include financial reports, for instance, okay, your sales report, profit report, customer complaint report, customer feedback, and so on and so forth, right? Product complaint, and so on and so forth. Okay, so start with the internal records, right? Because these internal records basically contain a lot of things. By the way, that also includes CRM in today's business landscape, okay? The customer relationship management, right? So customers may make their own inquiries through our Facebook page or online inquiries, posting their comments or questions on our through our website or our Twitter and so on and so forth, right? And a good CRM system actually helps us to retrieve that information. Okay. The next one is market intelligence, which is basically about understanding our competitors. Okay, understanding our competitors, or some people say, some people label it as competitive intelligence. Okay, what are the specific sources for market intelligence? Well, we can look at the trades exhibition, for instance, the announcements that our competitors are making, their press releases, okay, or their annual report, okay, they are part of the marketing intelligence, okay. And in some cases, if we are in fast-moving consumer goods or consumer electronic, for instance, when we do market visits, we talk to the trades, we may be able to collect some information about our competitors, all right? Now, well, of course, we should do it in an ethical way, okay? And the last part is basically market research, right? This is basically the one that we are going to discuss a lot more tonight. Okay, after we exhaust using these two sources of information, then we can move on to the next one, the market research. Okay. All right. So there are some examples in terms of sources of information that we just discussed before. Okay. Now, let's look at the types of data. When it comes to marketing research, we need to talk about the data that we are going to collect, okay? The primary data actually is collected through the research customized to a specific problem, to address a specific problem, okay? That's primary data, okay? We collect it, we commence the research ourselves, to customize to address specific problem, okay, specific marketing problem. Secondary data is basically the type of data gathered for a different purpose, right? A different purpose to our marketing problem, okay? They already exist somewhere, right? It could be internal, it could be external. The internal one includes our financial report, for instance, annual report, right? The external secondary data includes anything that we can source from the websites, journal, books, and any other publication. Okay, so there are the two types of data, all right? Now, between these two, primary and secondary, I would recommend you to go through the secondary data first before primary data. There are at least two reasons. There are at least two reasons for that. First, secondary data is much cheaper, and in some instances, it may be available for free. If you Google the Australian Bureau of Statistics, for instance, to collect some data about demographic profile, for instance, you get it for free, okay? The other reason why secondary data first is because we can solve some of the problems or part of the problem that we want to ask in the primary research, so that we can elevate the research questions in the primary research to the next level. So we are going to get deeper analysis, okay, deeper insights from our primary data, okay? There you go, that's primary, secondary data. That includes the internal and also external, okay? And all right, you can go through these things yourselves in terms of advantages of internal data source and disadvantages of internal data source, basically. And the other thing that I'd like to discuss is about the primary data collection, right? Now, the primary data collection is actually the main point in the market research, right? So when we have exhausted the other things, okay, then we do primary research, right? Which is basically the last venue in terms of collecting data. Okay. Now, the again, primary research, before we push the button to call the research agency, okay, before we do that, make sure that we have research the secondary data. We have collected the secondary data because that helps us to tighten our research questions in the primary research. Okay, okay. Now these are two main research instruments in terms of to collect primary data. The first one is questionnaires, and the second one is mechanical devices. Okay, the questionnaires are quite popular in marketing research. That helps us to conduct the in-person or focus groups. Well, for focus group, we normally call it as discussion guides. More appropriate if we label it as a discussion guide. All right. For mail research, for instance, we mail the questionnaire, okay, and we can also conduct phone interview, and we use questionnaire in our phone research. Okay, and we can also do online research. I don't know whether you subscribe to any online research link. I subscribe to SurveyMonkey. That's one of them, and some other people use Google Form to conduct online research. Okay, that helps us to create the questionnaire. All right. And mechanical devices, we have several things like checkout scanners. This one is normally used in retail audit research. So the research agencies such as AC Nielsen and Sinovate, they're quite popular in terms of retail audit. Okay, so they use the checkout scanners. If we do shopping at Woolies and Coles, of the products that we purchase would be scanned, the barcode will be scanned, and that scan actually is not going to be wasted, right? It contains information that they store, and the data in their storage would be basically made available for the research agencies, and they're going to do further analysis and projection for retail audit. Okay, so from that retail audit data, basically we can get the consumption data. For instance, how much do people eat certain product, for instance, right? At what value, right? How much do they spend in total, right? And which brands do they did they buy in the last purchase? Okay, and so on and so forth. Okay. Meters, well, here we actually, to be more precise, it is actually about people meters. You may find that a lot of us still, a lot of marketers run advertising campaign, TV advertising campaigns specifically. And there is a question ages ago about the effectiveness of the advertising dollars. Okay. And AC Nielsen is the leading company in this area actually. So they organize what they call as the people diary. Okay, so TV diary. All right, so people fill out the questionnaire. Okay, to explain which TV program that they watch the night before, and so on and so forth. Right. Now we know that it is based on the recollection. Okay, so it's not that accurate. Okay, so the guys at AC Nielsen then create what they call as people meter, right? They send the gadget, the device, similar to the set-top box. If you recall, we used to have that kind of set-top box plugged into our TV because the government is changing the channel. And similar to that device, but the device in terms of people meter are actually detect which program at what time that you watch. Okay. Now I'm hearing that they have advanced that people meters technology to be able to detect how many people watching it. Okay. The next one is neuromarketing technology. So brain activity equipment. So they plug in a few cables here and there, and then they're going to measure this sensory system of the respondent. Okay. To certain stimulus that they give. All right. So that's basically data, and also the instruments that are basically quite popular. And the next one is actually about types of marketing research. So we have three types of marketing research. The first one is observational, survey, and experimental. Okay, observational is actually about observing our respondents in their natural environment. Okay, we observe, we blend in the respondent's life actually. Okay, and some people working in anthropology discipline actually develop what they call as ethnographic research. Okay, so that's observation. The purpose is again to observe how these respondents behave in their natural environment. Okay, so in brief, that is actually part of qualitative research. Okay, we actually get qualitative data, right? Now, the next one is survey, which is basically measuring people's opinion on something, okay, including their attitudes, their behavior, right? So they are basically quantitative research. So when you use the term survey, you actually conduct a quantitative research. Okay? And the last one is experimental, which is basically testing hypotheses. Okay, well, I don't think it is theories, because theories are basically verified hypotheses. Okay, so we have done the experimental. Okay, so testing the hypothesis. Okay, now look, this one is basically helping us to generate the theory. Okay, when it comes to theory, we try to look at the correlations between at least two variables, right? Whether variable A affecting variable B, right? Or in other words, we normally say independent variable, where a certain independent variable affecting certain dependent variable, okay? And if it is proven, then we can create the theory, okay? Right, now from marketing perspective, from marketing practice perspective, we can also do experimental through not only testing the theory, we can also do some experiments actually. For instance, what about if we increase the price of certain product in one city only and not increasing the price for the other cities, and we are going to observe, okay? Or if you manage a chain restaurant, okay, you can also do that kind of testing. Okay? You launch a new menu in a couple of outlets, in a couple of restaurants, and don't do that in the other restaurants, and see how your sales go, for instance. Okay, right. So that's basically types of marketing research. Okay. Now, in terms of research technique, we have two types of research techniques. All right, qualitative and quantitative. Yeah, qualitative research technique generates the information in the format of people's opinions or thoughts or words. Okay, so we normally use open-ended questions. Right? That is the beauty of conducting qualitative technique. Okay, we can probe the information from the respondent. Okay, therefore, we use open-ended question. Okay, we do not very little opportunity, we use close-ended question in the qualitative research technique. Okay, so the popular technique in here include FGD, focus group discussion, in-depth interview, okay, in-depth interview or case study, and observation, okay, which is basically part of the qualitative technique. Okay, now FGD or focus group discussion basically is organized with one moderator, someone moderating the discussion. This person normally has a list of questions as a discussion guide. All right, and we invite 6 to 10 respondents to come to the FGD. So that's kind of meeting thing. You can consider it is a kind of meeting, but for the purpose of generating marketing insights. Right. So the moderator in here will ask questions in relation to certain marketing topics, and they discuss that. Right. And normally in that FGD, the moderator also has one research assistant to help taking notes and doing the other things, including logistical things. Okay. And in-depth interview is actually the same thing, right? We ask open-ended questions, okay? And the big difference between in-depth interview and FGD is in the in-depth interview, we only have one respondent, okay? Now you can imagine that it will be much more expensive, okay? Now the reason why some research requires in-depth interview is because the in-depth interview is because the respondent is not easy to get. Okay, if you invite them to come to the FGD, they will not come because they're just too busy. But if you make an appointment, having a meeting with them, you have a better chance. Okay, and sometimes the topic is probably a bit sensitive. So if you invite them to come to the FGD, assuming they do come to the FGD, they may not speak up. Okay, so that's open-ended. Okay, now observation, we just discussed that as well. Okay, and quantitative, here we talk about closed-ended questions predominantly. Okay, we may have a little bit of open-ended question, but not too much, right? Because you can imagine that our respondents may not be able to spend a lot of time to answer the questionnaires, right? When I started my career in marketing, we say that we need to consider the questionnaire to be completed in 40 minutes. But now, well, look, if you ask people to spend 40 minutes to fill out our questionnaire, they may say, well, sorry, I need to catch a train, or I need to do this, I need to have dinner, or I need to pick up my child, and so on and so forth, right? So a lot of the questions would be closed-ended questions. Okay? You may ask a few why question, which is basically open-ended questions, right? And again, the popular technique in here is survey, right, or questionnaire. Okay, so we spread the questionnaire to our respondents, right, including through mail or face-to-face. Okay. Right, so that's basically quantitative and qualitative. So there are two types of research techniques, qualitative and quantitative, okay? In terms of quantitative, it involves lots of people, normally 100 or more, right? Lots of respondents, okay? But little depth, right? So that's the beauty of quantitative. You cover lots of respondents compared with the FGD, for instance, focus group discussion, okay? But it is going to be little depth, all right? We normally use statistical tools to measure it, okay? So the information that we generate from quantitative research would be in a statistical format, such as mean score, for instance, all right? Or correlations coefficients, okay? Or any other statistical index, okay? And we also look at the margin of error. Okay, so from statistic perspective, we look at the margin of error. Okay, so there are basically some a few things about research techniques, qualitative and quantitative. Okay, and now look, these are basically a bit more info about the qualitative techniques. I'm not going to discuss that with you. Okay, that's one that we discussed. Actually, the research process flows this way. Okay, in terms of the steps that we undertake when it comes to assessing the information. Okay, interview managers and so on and so forth, until what are the costs of obtaining, processing, and storing and delivering the information. Okay. Now, what I'd like us to do is to discuss this one here, the research process, okay, which is quite important for us. Okay, the research process actually starts with the defining the problem and research objectives. Now, in my experience, managing a research process, this one is actually the hardest part, right? You may be laughing that, hey, are you not the marketing manager here, or are you not a marketer for this business? Well, yeah, well, sometimes we don't know the problem. We only know sales is going down, right? That is actually leading me to the next thing, okay? Which is about differentiating business problem and research problem, okay? Business problem is anything related to the performance of the business, like sales, okay? And research problem is actually related to the information that we need to explain the performance of the business. Okay, if sales is going down, for instance, over the last, let's say, 2 years, and we need to conduct some research, then we are actually saying we need to find the information to help us explaining why sales is going down and how we can rectify it. Okay, so that's basically the difference between business problem and research problem. Okay, so one of the things that I'd like to highlight is we need to be able, as a marketer, we need to be able to convert the business problem into research problem. Okay, how do we do that? We normally look after we look at the business performance. Okay, we analyze the performance. We look at the possible answers, right? Why our sales is going down? Then we need to look at, in our checklist, we need to look at what are the possible reasons our sales is going down. Okay, is that because competitors just launched a stronger product? Is that because of quality? Is that because the customers changed their preferences, right, in the trends, right, or some other issues? Okay, now assuming it is about competitors, then that leads us to the information, that leads us to the research problem. Okay, so the information that we need to find out is basically about understanding how our brand is perceived in the competition. So there, with that, we get feedback about our brand as well as our competitors' brands, right? So that's hopefully that gives you an illustration. Okay? So following that, we actually design the research plan. Okay, that includes what information that we need to collect, right? Secondary, primary, and also how we collect them. That goes back to a research plan. And we also need to include the sampling plan. Okay, who will be the respondents? How many respondents we need? If we conduct focus group discussion, how many groups that we need to conduct? And the sampling procedure for quantitative technique. Okay, and we implement the plan. When it comes to implementing the plan, we actually say that we collect the data, we interview, we do the field research, we interview the respondents, or if we hire a research agency, then research agency will do it for us. And lastly, interpret and report the results. Right? In terms of interpreting the results, we need to get back to the problem, research problem that we had before. Okay. Right. So that's basically the research process. Right. Next, the following slides are basically about the research process. Okay. And in terms of research objective, I just want to highlight to you there are 3 types of objectives when you conduct research. The first one is exploratory or diagnostic. Some people label it as diagnostic. Here we have little information about certain issues, therefore we explore it. Okay, and as you can imagine that this is actually leading us to conducting a qualitative research. Okay, and then we look at the descriptive, which is the next one, which is basically about describing things, right? And here we normally look at the describing who, what, where, when, why, or how, right? So 5 W's, 1 H, okay? Which is basically about the general consumer behavior, okay? So that's the descriptive research. We normally conduct survey in here, okay? From quantitative research. And the next one is causal, which is basically about finding the correlations between the 2 variables, okay? And this one here is basically about experimental research, okay? All right, so some research companies in here, Roy Morgan, for instance, or choice.com.au, okay, or a couple of research, the other research agencies that I talk about, AC Nielsen or Sinovate. There are also research agencies available in the market, okay. Right, I'm not going to discuss that. That's basically our marketing research topic, okay? And the next thing I'd like to discuss is actually about the consumer behavior topic, okay? Any questions so far about the marketing research topic?
No.
All good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Right, now let's have a look at the consumer behavior topic. Okay. Oh. Okay, now consumer behavior is actually about understanding more about the consumers, right? And this is actually about the consumption personal consumption or family consumption. Okay, so if we analyze personal consumption, household consumption, or family consumption, then we are actually in the domain of consumer buying behavior. Okay, and if we analyze the purchase made for an organization, that means we are talking about the business buyer behavior, right? So it is a different domain, right? So, and again, for your assessment, I would personally recommend you to look at the consumer behavior, not the business buyer behavior. Okay, but let's see this topic tonight. Okay. Well, the topic consumer behavior actually actually comes on stage because as a marketer, we need to understand more about our consumer. The more we understand about consumer, the better for us, because we can adjust our strategy, we can adjust our offering. Okay, that includes the marketing mix, that includes the target market, that includes the positioning that we need to adjust, for instance. Okay, or anything that we want to offer for the customers. Okay. Right, now look, we also need to consider that consumers have what they call as the buyer's black box. The reason why we call it as buyer's black box is because it is not easy to understand inside their mind. Okay, we can look at, we can observe their behavior, but inside their mind is something difficult for us to understand. We need to have the neuromarketing research technique to understand a little bit about that in terms of how they respond to certain stimulus. Right. That leads me to this one here, the model of buyer behavior. Okay, the model of buyer behavior, he actually takes the stimulus response model. Okay, and here we say that the stimulus in here actually is from the environment. Now, if you look at that, the first set of the stimulus consists of marketing mix variables: the product, price, place, promotion, people, process, and physical evidence. Okay, that gives stimulus, that will become stimulus for our customers. Okay, and aside from that, we know that our customers are also under the influence of the macro environment, such as economic, cultural, social, technological. Okay, that also influence the customers' decision making. Okay, now this is the black box that we talk about. All right. We know little, that's why we call it as a black box, but we know that the black box itself basically consists of two things: the buyer's characteristics and the buyer's decision-making process. All right? So these two, the characteristics of the buyer, the personality of the buyer, all right, and also the way they make decision influence their own decision. All right? If this is the stimulus from the environment, this is the system that they have in the to process it. Okay, the way they process it will influence how they respond to it. Okay, now marketers can observe this because it is their consumer's behavior, and also this, right, the buyer's responses. Okay, and the buyer's black box requires us to do more, a different type of research to understand it, and that includes the neuromarketing. Okay. All right, now the next thing I'd like to discuss briefly is basically about the decision process and Oh, are you all right?
Are you all right? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting.
That's interesting.
My computer talks back to me.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Okay. So this is basically about the consumer buying decision process and possible influences on the process. Okay. So there are several factors that affect the consumer's decision making. Okay. They include the situational influences, psychological influences, and social influences. Right. Now, I would recommend everybody to go through this topic in in the e-text. Okay, so you can go through it because this one here is relevant to your assessment 3. Okay, I just highlight to you that there are several groups in here, and in terms of factors influencing consumer behavior, right? So they are quite relevant to your last 2 assessments, assessment 2 and 3. Okay, and this is the buyer decision-making process that includes problem recognition, information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase, and post-purchase evaluation. Okay, I just want to go through this a bit more detail here because I want to align our understanding in here and highlight a few things. All right. Now, the scholars suggest that the consumers will start in the decision-making process. Consumers start with what we call as a problem recognition or need recognition. Okay, problem recognition is actually the state where the consumers find the gap. Okay, they are aware of the gap between the desired stage, and the actual stage. Okay, so they feel the gap. Okay, and with that, they actually think about, they are actually aware of their needs. Okay, now what makes them aware of the gap? Okay, there are 2 sources. The first one is internal need, and the second one is external. Okay, that includes your marketing mix variables. Right. Now imagine that when you do your shopping, you push the trolley, you may find, okay, oh, something is nice, something is interesting. When you pass, when you are in the shopping mall, and through the window glass, you find a product that you're interested. Okay, so that's external. Okay, including marketing mix. Okay, and also your friend's suggestion. Okay, or the advertising campaign, and so on and so forth, which is basically part of marketing mix variable. Okay, now that leads the customers, that leads the buyer to do some information search. Okay, so this is the stage where they do research. Okay, this is the stage where the consumers or the buyer do. The buyers do research. Okay, and in terms of doing research, I just want to highlight there are 4 sources of information that the customers normally research, but I just want to highlight 2. Right, the first one is the commercial source of information. Commercial source of information. Okay, which is basically about the official information that that marketers publish, including their website, advertising campaign, catalog, and so on and so forth. They are published by the marketers. Okay. The second type of information is actually about personal network. Guys, that's the second source of information. Now, the 2 of them. The personal information, the personal network is actually about, from their friends, relatives, okay, anything from the relationships, okay? And the 2 sources of information have different purposes. The commercial information basically helps the customers to get the official information, okay, to get the official information, okay? And without that, the customers will find it hard to do some research about the product that they want to purchase. The personal source of information, though, is more convincing. Okay? You can imagine that if you want to buy a car and you talk to your friends recommend you another brand, then you really think about it. Okay? Then that leads us to the evaluation of alternatives. Okay, in terms of evaluation of alternatives, we actually talk about juggling, right? Weighing in, as a customers, we are weighing in the information. Okay, that includes everything: the product, the price, the placements, the dealer, the salesperson. Okay, and so on and so forth. The service level, right? So we juggle the information. Okay, then we go through the next one, which is basically purchase. At purchase level, we make that decision. Yep, this is the one that we want to purchase, but it doesn't mean that we can't change it. We can still change it, right? And last one is about post-purchase evaluation. That basically our evaluation of purchase, whether we like it or not, okay, or whether we are satisfied or not. Okay, we are satisfied or not with our decision. Okay. So that's basically the 5 steps in our buying process, okay, in our consumer buying process, all right? Now, the thing is, not all purchase situation is treated the same way, all right? If there are 3 types of decision making. The first one is extended decision making, okay? This is where consumers go through all steps comprehensively, okay? Comprehensively. Okay. Now, why is that? Well, because in the extended decision making, the consumers are making a decision that is high risk, considered as high risk. High risk in terms of what? In terms of social risk and in terms of financial risk. Okay. If you buy a car, for instance, well, we will do some research. Okay. And the next one is basically a moderate decision making, okay, which is basically the risk is moderate, okay, not that high, okay, from social and financial perspective, and we go through all steps as consumer, but not comprehensive, okay, not comprehensively, okay. So that's moderate, okay. Well, you can imagine that for some consumers, buying TV is probably not that high risk, but for some other consumer group, it may be quite high in terms of giving the personal satisfaction and also the social risk, financial risk. Okay, and the last one is habitual decision making. Okay, or impulse buying. Okay, this is basically a low risk. Okay. Example of this kind of decision making includes buying breakfast cereal. For instance, you are going to do research for breakfast cereal. Okay, the risk is quite low, and consumers have experience as well in buying this kind of product. Okay, that's the reason why we call it as low risk in terms of decision making. We have the habit already. Okay. Right, so that's basically consumer decision-making process. Okay, I'm not going to discuss this information search and so on and so forth. You can go through it yourself. Okay. The next thing that is also relevant to your last assessments is basically involvement. Okay, there are 2 types of involvement: high involvement and low involvement, which is basically about the degree of the consumer's perception on the risk. Okay. High involvement is obviously about the decision on the products that are quite expensive, okay, or high risk in terms of financial and also in terms of social. Okay, low is the opposite. Okay, so that's the one that we just discussed before. Extended, they use the term extended, limited, and routinized or habitual decision making. Okay, that's one that I just discussed before. All right. Impulse buying. All right, now just briefly about the situational. If we go back to the previous slides again, this one. Okay, there are 3 types of factors. Okay, in terms of influencing consumer decision making the process. Okay, situational, psychological, and social influence. Right. Let's just have a look at those factors briefly. Okay, so we have under situational, we have these guys here. Okay, the mood of the consumers to make decision. Okay, physical surroundings, social surroundings, time, dimension, giving them pressures to make a decision, and purchase reason. Okay, and in terms of psychological, we have the perception, motives, right? Learning, attitude, self-concepts that affects the consumer decision making, lifestyle of the consumers as well. Okay, so they are the factors that you want to look at, especially for your assessment 3. You can pick up, you can select 1 factor from situational, 1 factor from psychological. Okay, and the next one is your the next one is your social influence. Okay, they are basically the outer layer, if you like. So if we can start from the outer layer to look at it, and some people call it as the outer layer in terms of the factors of influencing consumer decision making. Okay, they includes the culture, the value that the consumers adopt, roles, the family influences, reference group, opinion leaders. So if you work in the in marketing and and you need to talk to doctors. For instance, you are actually dealing with the opinion leaders in your marketing campaign, right, or digital networks. Okay, so that's basically the three types of influences: the situational influence, psychological influence, and also the social influences. Okay, right. So that's basically our topic tonight. Any questions